Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Office 365 webinar. Is SharePoint Online the right fit for you? It's 10 a.m., so we're going to get going, being cognizant of everyone's time. So this morning, just a few quick introductions. My name is Elisa Calder, and I'm a portal management consultant here at Habanero. I'm just doing some introductions for Will and our question panelists for later in the webinar. So the webinar will be led today by Will Hardy, our practice lead for employee portals. He's also been a senior consultant on a number of our Office 365 SharePoint Online implementations. So he's the man to go to for all questions Office 365 here at Habanero, and we wanted to be able to share his knowledge out with the world through the internet on a webinar. So today's agenda, we're going to try to cram in as much as we can into 45 minutes and leave 15 minutes at the end for questions. We're going to start off with a definition of Office 365 and SharePoint Online and talk through kind of the different permutations of each of these online offerings from Microsoft. We're going to discuss the difference between SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Premise, get through to where SharePoint Online can be leveraged most effectively. So what are the use cases within your organization that would be really well aligned with using SharePoint Online? Some key differentiators of the product, discuss the influencing organizational factors, some important points to consider, so things that we've learned through our own implementations of SharePoint Online portals, and what building real-world solutions with SharePoint Online actually looks like, so some stories from the front line. And we're going to end off at the end with questions. We're hoping to save at least 15 minutes. We have some senior technical folks in the room with us as well today to help answer any more technically focused questions. So please submit your questions to us via the WebEx chat. I'll make sure to record all of those and then to bring them up with the panelists at the end. So just a little bit about Habanero before we get going. If you're not familiar with what we do, we're really passionate here about helping people and organizations thrive. So while we love SharePoint and technology, underneath it all, we're really trying to build solutions that make people's work lives better and help those individuals thrive in what they do. We believe that great workplaces create high-performing companies, and that technology is a significant, plays a significant role in helping build those great workplaces. It's an impetus that's really important to allow for great workplaces and great work experiences. And we have three main focus areas within the work that we do: employee portals and intranets, customer portals and websites, and member portals and extranets. So today's webinar won't be focusing in any of those breadths specifically. We're more just discussing SharePoint Online as a product offering and what it has for the marketplace. Oh, and as I already said, please ask questions via the WebEx chat. I'll make sure to mark all of those down. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Will so that we can get to the meaty stuff of this webinar, what everyone's interested in.
Great, thanks, Elisa, and welcome once again to everyone joining us today on this webinar. Elisa has given you a quick overview of Habanero and a snapshot of what we're about, but I'd like to add to that by describing a little bit about Habanero's role in the cloud to give you a sense of where we're coming from into today's webinar. So Habanero is known for our depth and domain expertise in SharePoint. On that platform, both from a technical, user experience, and portal management fronts. In short, we know SharePoint inside and out, and we're regarded as a thought leader in this space. We've built literally hundreds of successful SharePoint implementations, ranging from anything from a simple configuration of out-of-the-box capabilities to heavily customized portals that really push the limits of the platform. Most of this experience, however, has traditionally been with on-premise solutions, where we've got relatively few restrictions, given that SharePoint is such a broad and extendable platform. Like most people in the SharePoint space, however, we've been spending the last year and a half really ramping up on Office 365, and specifically SharePoint Online in its current format. We believe in some cases, but not all, SharePoint Online has a great potential for both our current clients as well as really a new array of customers who may have previously faced some constraints when trying to take advantage of SharePoint on-premise. As a Microsoft Gold partner, we see loud and clear that Microsoft is making their cloud service offering really a key priority and a central focus for them. So not surprisingly, many partners, including ourselves, are following that direction. We've been working with a handful of early adopter customers, such as Finning, the Refinery Group, and Alberta Motor Association, on building out solutions on the Office 365 platform, and have learned a great deal. So, in short, we're extremely excited about this new platform and the opportunities that it presents. But at the same time, we're also faced with many new challenges in our ability to deliver the type of solutions that we're really known for. Office 365 is easily the hottest discussion topic internally at Habanero, and it's one in which we invested pretty heavily in terms of R&D. This is in addition to SharePoint 2013 in general, which everyone is pretty enthusiastic about all around. The key for us, though, is determining, for Office 365, and specifically SharePoint Online, is determining exactly when it's the right fit for the customer, and when perhaps on-premise might make better sense. So we thought it's important to cover off a few common questions up front that many of our clients often have, and likely members of this audience might have, if you're considering the cloud. So first off, does Office 365 equal SharePoint Online? Are these two things the same thing? Well, in fact, not really. Office 365 and SharePoint Online are terms that are quite often used interchangeably. Office 365 is really a comprehensive cloud service offering that includes many different services, such as Link Online, Exchange Online. So while you can, and some subscription plans do just allow you and provide SharePoint Online only as a standalone service, it is really just one of many services that are available through this platform. And in general, the more services that are utilized within Office 365, the higher degree of value one returns from the platform. And users will see different options in the header links based on the available services provided to them and granted to them by their administrator. So here's one example, and another user, depending on the licenses they have available to them, may see different options in the Office 365 header, which is a standard thing across the board when you start to use that platform. You don't see specifically links to SharePoint ever, but the sites and newsfeed links that you see here is where the majority of the SharePoint Online capabilities do surface. Next one is SharePoint Online the same as SharePoint 2013? And what version of the platform is available through the cloud? And the answer to that is that SharePoint Online is a constantly evolving service that will see regular feature upgrades targeted at every 90 days. Microsoft has purposely diverged from associating the traditional year-based versioning system, as it really no longer applies in the cloud. And while SharePoint 2013 on-premise will see pretty regular cumulative updates, SharePoint Online will see more frequent changes, and the two platforms ultimately will not stay in sync. So some features may be unique to SharePoint Online, and some will only be available to on-premise. So this definitely takes the two products in different directions. Is Office 365 the only SharePoint cloud hosting option? As we're focusing on SharePoint Online today, it's important to point out that Office 365 is not the only cloud-based hosting option for hosting SharePoint. SharePoint can be hosted in the Windows Azure cloud infrastructure, as well as the growing list of other third-party cloud providers out there. This is not really apples to apples, however, as we're really talking about managed infrastructure versus managed application service offering. But this is definitely a good option for those who need to customize SharePoint beyond what's possible through SharePoint Online, as we'll get into. Yet they're still looking for the benefits and advantages of having a cloud-based infrastructure. And also, is cloud an all-or-nothing proposition? So SharePoint supports hybrid approaches very well, with the hybrid being that some of your SharePoint solutions are hosted in the cloud and others on premises. Why would you want to go with this approach? Well, some examples might be having team site collaboration, which is very well suited for the cloud, hosted on Office 365. And let's say an ECM record center, which definitely has limitations within the cloud, hosted on-premise. There are other examples of where hybrid makes sense, but that's just one. So next up, how does SharePoint Online really stack up against the benchmark SharePoint 2013 on-premise? And well, that entirely depends on what aspects of SharePoint you're looking at. We feel it's important to look at the comparative strengths and weaknesses of each platform in different capability areas. So in our opinion, we feel that this table represents the key strengths at a glance and illustrates how we feel the two platforms stack up in some key capability areas. 3 stars are the highest. So again, this is the current state of affairs, and it might change over time as new features are added to the cloud offering, as they will be. And as you'll see, SharePoint Online is not as strong as on-premise in all areas, but it's extremely capable in some. And those being things like collaboration and social, which we'll get into in the next couple slides. And also to point out, this is really comparing the Enterprise Edition of SharePoint 2013 to a SharePoint Online plan to the E3 plan. So where can SharePoint Online be leveraged the most effectively? We just covered off and showed you what we think are the key strengths. Now, where can that be applied to make an impact in your organization? We've had a chance to get our hands dirty and digest the platform with a number of projects under our belt now. And we feel that SharePoint Online is a great candidate in some key scenarios, but it's clearly not for everything that you might currently look to SharePoint on-premise for. And as I mentioned, that may well change as the platform evolves, but this is the current state. So as we mentioned, for the time being, these are scenarios that we think we have the highest degree of confidence in, that SharePoint Online can be a good candidate. Tops on that list is enterprise collaboration. This offers the traditional bread and butter core strengths of SharePoint for empowering employees and enterprise collaboration capabilities, especially around document sharing via team sites. This is what SharePoint does very well. SharePoint Online is extremely full-featured and capable in this regard, especially when you couple it with other integrated tools like Link. This is made even more powerful when you layer in the enterprise social capabilities recently added to SharePoint and available in Online. And that's social, which is clearly linked to intended business purpose, like, for example, a project newsfeed discussion within a project team site. So this is what we feel is a perfect scenario for SharePoint Online. Next on that list is external collaboration and sharing. So SharePoint Online is extremely powerful for opening up those collaboration and sharing capabilities that you have internally and extending that reach to perhaps partners externally to your organization and with whom you need to connect with. SharePoint Online has made it extremely easy to share content and collaborate with external parties. And this includes either sharing individual files, like a document, or entire team sites if need be. The social capability that we mentioned internally also extends to reach externally, which is extremely powerful and traditionally a major gap for most organizations to have that capability with external parties. Just a couple things to point out, however, when we're talking about external sharing. It's important to note that there is a difference between external sharing and a full-blown extranet. When the term extranet is used, it typically brings with it certain connotations with regards to security and identity management. So SharePoint Online offers an extremely simple and cost-effective means to share content with external parties, which in many cases can totally fit the need perfectly. A good example would be for our Habanero project team sites, where we simply need to share content externally and collaborate with our customers. But there are given capabilities when it comes to security and authentication that you need to make sure that you're aware of the limitations and see whether SharePoint Online is the right fit for your organization. So what are some of those limitations? Things like inviting groups of users, such as an entire department of a partner that you're working with. Managing identities across multiple site collections. So removing a user from site collection A and having them automatically removed from site collection B at the same time. Ensuring specific login identity formats, like having complexity rules or two-factor authentication, or login auditing. These are some things that some people might assume would be a part of an extranet functionality that aren't at present supported by SharePoint Online. So that's just a few points of words to the wise. So the third area where we think SharePoint Online can be leveraged most effectively is with regards to web content publishing. And this is for light to medium scale employee portals. And this really takes the strengths of SharePoint in its web content management capabilities and the ability to also layer in and integrate a custom branded look and feel. Unfortunately, this doesn't include the exciting new search-driven capabilities that serve up content dynamically via search. Frankly, one of the things that is most exciting about SharePoint 2013, but hopefully that might be added in future editions. It's also important to note that for larger scale employee portals that have many custom site requirements or that could perhaps really benefit from the dynamic delivery of content that we just mentioned, we would still definitely stick with SharePoint on-premise. We think that is a better bet in that scenario. So given that SharePoint Online is not necessarily as strong as on-premise in all the feature areas, why would you consider the cloud? Well, we feel that SharePoint Online does have some extremely compelling arguments for consideration when you're evaluating whether to go on-premise or online. And those most prevalent include the following. Reduce infrastructure overhead. So this is an obvious one when you're talking about the cloud. You no longer need to have the server hardware costs, the highly skilled resources to maintain the infrastructure, and the ongoing sustainment and maintenance of that infrastructure that you need to have. And also a general reduced upfront effort in establishing a suitable SharePoint infrastructure. It's generally a lot less effort and cost. Second is that there is a predictable and scalable cost model. SharePoint Online Office 365 is based on a user subscription model. So that is very scalable. It limits the upfront big dollar investment because you can layer in numbers of active users over time. There's no ongoing migration or upgrade costs since you're always on the latest and greatest. Storage costs can be scaled up as needed to more of a just-in-time model. And just by nature of being a solution in the cloud, you avoid the tendency to have heavily customized solutions up front. Continuous platform evolution. So as we've mentioned, SharePoint Online will see a continual release of features every 90 days. So you're continually experiencing and benefiting from the latest and greatest, with new updates being pushed out to production at a very unprecedented cycle. And that is a vast shift from the every 3 years that we saw previously. We've got many clients running on-premise who are really held back from moving to the latest version of SharePoint due to the effort involved in the upgrade and migration to the latest platform. This is something which is not a factor in SharePoint Online, and a definite plus. But a point of caution, while continuous platform evolution is one of the biggest benefits of the cloud, it's also one of the biggest unknowns to us at the moment in terms of what effect those new feature releases, especially those which are relatively unpredictable, will have on configured sites in a live production environment, especially if there's any customizations that have been made. And Microsoft definitely limits the ability to make customization, but there is some ability to do that. So at present, there's really no way to test the effects of changes in advance, and there's limited visibility on what is actually coming. Also, if you've got multiple tenants running, they may not necessarily be in sync as changes are pushed out to groups of tenants over a staggered time frame. Next up is external content sharing and collaboration. So we've talked about this being one of the key use cases for SharePoint Online. This is the ability to easily share content with external parties outside your organization. So this is actually not new. SharePoint on-premise has always supported external sharing if the environment was set up accordingly for those type of external scenarios. But what SharePoint Online has done is made it way more easy and extremely to make that change after the fact, and very cost-effective to do so. As an additional plus, IT does not have to manage user accounts if they don't wish, if they want to use the authenticated model via the Microsoft account. And one of the important licensing changes announced by Microsoft is that external users no longer require CALs or client access licenses. So it makes it much more cost-effective from a licensing point of view. So just to give you sort of a visual sense of how easy it is to enable external sharing, what you see here is would be your tenant settings screen, where an administrator can come in and very simply change the external sharing options to allow a certain level of external sharing on your SharePoint Online environment. And there'd be a few other settings within your site collections, but it is very straightforward. And once that's enabled, users are able to share content externally, either, again, the individual files or the entire site, simply by adding that person's email address, which is external to your organization. And then that person would receive an invite, inviting them to access the file or the site. And depending on whether or not anonymous guest links have been enabled, they will be asked to authenticate or not, or just simply be able to open the file directly. So pretty straightforward. So just, again, it's a major benefit, but some words to the wise and some cautionary points here is that external content sharing does require super strong governance and communication, just because you are opening up content externally. External sharing, as we've covered, does not equal the full assumptions on extranet identity management. And also, you need to really be careful, because things like guest links can be forwarded and actioned by individuals other than the original recipient of the sharing request. So if that person forwards that sharing request to someone else, that person, unbeknownst to you, can now access your file. So it's really the first person to execute that link. So next real differentiator is rapid solution development. So SharePoint Online supports rapid solution development, as tenants can be set up very quickly and without the usual degree of infrastructure planning and provisioning. You really don't require large upfront investments. So for things like pilots and proof of concepts, as well as production sites, it supports that very agile, quick delivery method. Robust disaster recovery and failover protection. So obviously Microsoft is backing Office 365. They have SLA agreements in place that guarantee a 99.9% availability. They have multiple data centers located around the globe, and it is an extremely robust disaster recovery and failover coverage. Now, no doubt on-premise you would have a certain degree of this built in, but whether or not you have the scale and breadth and backing of Microsoft is in question. Try before you buy. So you've got fairly limited risk, and customers can easily prove out value through the free 30-day trials that are available with Office 365. So we definitely recommend that you take that opportunity to prove out what you're looking to do on the platform before fully committing. And that's a definite plus that we recommend most of our clients take up. Lastly, it's worth noting the Yammer licensing incentives. If you're considering another enterprise social platform, those will also have a licensing cost associated with them. Yammer licenses are built into some Office 365 subscription plans, in addition to what SharePoint social features are offered natively within SharePoint Online, and those are pretty good. So Yammer is 100% cloud-based, and you'll see continual integration in a fairly major way across the Office 365 suite, and it's essentially free. So next we'll look at some of the common organization factors which we see really stimulate a move to the cloud. We've talked with a lot of different clients, so we have gained a good understanding for what is attractive in the cloud and what is the big draw. We quite commonly encounter clients who are super keen to take advantage of SharePoint, yet they don't necessarily have the internal capacity to take on a proper SharePoint infrastructure project. And that might because either because they're held up in a larger IT project that's sort of midstream, like a ERP implementation or something like that, or they're lacking the available skill sets internally. Or sometimes is the case, there may be too many moving parts to coordinate, or contractual issues when you're dealing with an outsourced managed IT service provider. So the cloud offers a really good alternative and a way around this. Removing situational barriers, so overcoming common roadblocks that occur. And we see that all the time. And this might be related to legacy systems or technical environment limitations that evolve over time. And those can easily be changed in the short term. And that really can hold up the implementation of a SharePoint on-premise solution. In some cases, it might also occur with regional or geographic silos with global companies that prevent clear channels of communication and collaboration across those different silos. And this is where the cloud really offers a completely new alternative. Next is a need for speed and agility. So SharePoint Online, as we've mentioned, can really allow you to move forward much faster and with much greater ability than on-premise projects. It allows for rapid spin-up and spin-down of environments for pilots or production solutions alike, and without the usual degree of implementation planning, prep, and investment. So what do some of our clients say? We have a couple of thoughts from a client who has already made the move to SharePoint Online. And to look at one example, we'll focus on Finning International. For those who are unaware, Finning is a heavy equipment dealer with distribution rights for Caterpillar equipment across Canada, South America, and the UK. So they're a global company, many employees. They have existing implementations of SharePoint 2007 and 2010 on-premise in various capacities, as well as various regional intranets based on other CMS platforms unrelated to SharePoint altogether. So they have quite a complex technical environment spread across many different countries. Their primary usage scenario is for collaboration to support global teams who are based out of dispersed geographic locations. So they have one person in the UK that needs to collaborate with someone in South America, as well as someone in Canada. Their key drivers for the cloud include the fact that their existing setup from an IT standpoint meant to do what they wanted to achieve what they wanted to with respect to collaboration, would have required some fairly substantial infrastructure changes involving a lot of cost and a lot of effort. The core appeal for them of Office 365 specifically is that the platform is always current. They've had the pain of being on older versions of SharePoint and the migration and upgrade costs. Infrastructure and storage costs for them are scalable, so that's a definite draw. And it generally aligns well to where the world is going from a collaboration services point of view. So things like Yammer and the rest of which are cloud-based. So that is what Finning really felt strongly and why they made the decision to go with Office 365. So some important points to consider when you're evaluating the cloud. First off, it's important to be aware of and agreeable to Microsoft's stated cloud principles. These are 8 cloud principles that Microsoft is pretty clear and upfront. These are the way that their cloud services is governed by, and this is something that they're really very clear that is the case. So it's upfront. It's important that you do review these. A few in particular, we have to say we don't necessarily think are the case just yet, and those are the solution evolves rapidly with a documented roadmap. We don't necessarily think that there's a visibility on future changes coming down the line. That's something hopefully that will improve. And secondly, offering tools to migrate to the cloud efficiently. These are more along the lines for Exchange Online as opposed to SharePoint Online at present. So it's definitely a gap to be filled and potentially will be filled by other third-party vendors. Second is, so in addition to the stated cloud principles, all enterprise clients, and enterprise clients in Microsoft's view is, I believe, 2,500 employees on and up, are asked to complete the Customer Decision Framework, or CDF. And this is a fairly comprehensive fit evaluation that's led by Microsoft to ensure that Office 365 is a suitable platform for that client. It really does clear up expectations on functionality and answer a lot of questions before a client gets too far down the decision stream and helps them to make a well-informed decision. That, as I mentioned, is led by Microsoft, and it follows several different decision streams. So capability, technical fit, business value, security, legal and compliance, transaction procurement, governance, and lifecycle services and support. So while Microsoft does require that enterprise clients partake in the CDF, we actually think it's a great idea for all clients, whether you're mid-sized or small, also go through the CDF to make sure that you're fully understanding the capabilities of the SharePoint Online platform and Office 365. So outside of those more formal evaluations, some of the major points just to bring up, first off is SharePoint Online is primarily intended for configuration and not customization. And this is really required to support the continuous evolution model, as customizations may cause unforeseen issues when you're releasing new features into the cloud. So it's not surprising that this is the case. But it is an important factor for you to consider if, say, you're migrating an existing SharePoint solution that has many customization, or what you need to do would require customization. And it's really a good factor to consider. Maybe SharePoint on-premise is a better bet if that is the case. There is certainly room for some degree of customization, such as look and feel branding and also cloud app development. But in general, there are much tighter restrictions than on-premise. Second is, do you need to integrate with other systems? So again, in line with the limited ability to customize, the ability to integrate with other systems outside of SharePoint is possible, but there are some very specific approaches that are required to achieve that. So BCS, or Business Connectivity Services, is fairly limited in Office 365, with the limits really set by what can be configured. Integration is best achieved by utilizing the cloud host app model, which requires custom apps to be hosted outside of SharePoint. But as a general rule, we would definitely recommend proving out your integration up front as part of a proof of concept before really ramping into the solution to make sure that you can achieve what you need to. Next is your organization sensitive to hosting data in the US? This has been a pretty hot topic for many of our clients, and we'll see. Time will tell if it becomes less so. But Microsoft is pretty clear that the data is hosted across multiple data centers around the globe. None of those are in Canada, and some of those are definitely in the US. So some organizations may have legal and compliance issues, depending on the content that they have, that really prevents you from hosting certain data in the US. There's various different arguments as to whether hosting something outside of the US really protects you from that, but that's a debate we won't get into right now. Do you require a true QA and training environment? So this is, from a developer point of view, this is something that is fairly challenging for us, in that there's no true support for QA and training environments, the ability to deploy a single solution across multiple tenants. And that's something that we're definitely is part of our core process on-premise. Lastly, are you planning to have business-critical content hosted on SharePoint Online? So while Microsoft does have 99.9% uptime guarantees as part of their SLA, And there's a certain degree of support for offline access if you don't have access to the internet. You will generally become more dependent on your ISP. So what happens when your ISP perhaps goes down? Also, you can't necessarily control when Microsoft outages will occur. So what happens then? Generally speaking, they will be in non-peak business hours, but if you're a global company, it's hard to determine what those hours are. So now that we've had a chance to develop some real-world solutions, as I mentioned, for clients like Finning and Alberta Motor Association and Refinery Group, we've also had a chance to really reflect on our experience in that process. And we've learned a great deal. We thought we would summarize what we think works well and what we have found to be some key challenges that are still to overcome. And for that, we've looked at it from a number of different perspectives. So feature set and configuration, branding and UX, SharePoint development and deployment, and operations and management. These are the 4 lenses that we looked at. So in terms of feature set and configuration, what works well? First off, SharePoint Online is very full-featured in many respects, particularly around collaboration and social. So it's much more robust than it ever has been in past incarnations of SharePoint Online. From a SharePoint analyst, power user point of view, it's extremely easy to configure out solutions either in production or to prove out functionality and proof of concept on the platform. You don't generally need to have a lot of developer support to prove out things and to configure sites in production. The emerging app marketplace ecosystem, this is something that is slowly gaining traction, but it does offer the ability to have commoditized service offerings and available add-ins to be bolted onto your site without any need for development. SharePoint Online is extremely well integrated with other 365 services like Exchange and Link Online. So as I mentioned, the more services that you use, the more value that you get from the platform. And another thing to point out is that the platform is extremely consistent. Things like the menus and layouts are all very, very consistent from site template to site template and from different service offerings within the 365 platform. It's really not that hard to get the hang of using it. Some of the key challenges, however, in this respect is that the visibility of future feature releases. It's hard to know what's coming, when it's going to be coming, and from a power user or SharePoint analyst, you're really the one that needs to communicate that to your users. And it definitely has an effect on change management and support. Also, only a subset of the search capabilities, which are, as I mentioned, super exciting part of SharePoint 2013, are available within SharePoint Online at present. So hopefully that'll be boosted up in future releases. Branding and UX, our next area of focus. So this is an area that's near and dear to our hearts at Habanero. We're pretty well known for our ability to blend really great user experiences on top of the SharePoint platform. So how do we find working with the cloud model? Well, first off is we were surprisingly impressed. Light to medium site branding application by deploying composed looks and themes works extremely well, and it's fairly easy. There's a seamless branding engine across SharePoint Online and on-premise. So you're really able to reuse that across if you have, say, a hybrid approach. That really works well. The flat UI makes the brand integration quite easy. This is probably not something that's unique to SharePoint Online, but SharePoint 2013 in general and the changes that introduced, it's much easier to integrate a brand than it has been in the past version of SharePoint. And also, the out-of-the-box experience, out of the gate, is really generally regarded by most of the users that I deal with as very intuitive, very consistent, and fairly well refined. I've really yet to find someone who does not like it. Some of the key challenges from a branding and UX perspective, certain system pages like the My Profile page, such as this, for example, the screenshot that you see here, cannot be branded. So if you're putting effort into branding the rest of your SharePoint solution, and users suddenly switch over to their profile or their newsfeed page, they will get the SharePoint out-of-the-box look and feel, and that's because things like feature stapling is not enabled. So it can be a bit jarring from a user point of view, and also an effective way to navigate back to the SharePoint site that you were on prior to going here. That kind of leads into our second point, which is linking to a consistent homepage. Especially if you're using it for team sites and collaboration and you've got a large number of team sites, Microsoft has offered and made available the sites page within the platform, but really once you get over a certain number of sites, the findability and ability to organize those sites becomes a little unwieldy. So what we have found in the projects that we've done is that we've had to develop a site directory to really make the presentation of those team sites more obvious. And this is something that's just not out of the box. And lastly here, the app model, which is being introduced. It is challenging to make those apps feel fully native within the site that you're inserting them within, simply because it doesn't support a fluid UI, and there's quite a few restrictions on the ability to apply branding. SharePoint development and deployment. So not surprisingly, as I've mentioned, SharePoint Online is primarily for configuration, not customization. So if you're a developer, it will no doubt feel a little limiting in what you can do on the platform. What there is, however, and where we are intrigued about is the new Cloud Host app model, and that really does open the door for you to integrate and offer custom development and allow you the ability to tap into line of business systems like SAP. So it does offer some very intriguing opportunities and leaves that door open for developers to do some cool things. Some of the key challenges, however, include the fact that sandbox solutions have been deprecated. And for those who aren't aware, sandbox solution was a concept introduced in SharePoint 2010 that allows you to deploy custom code to a SharePoint farm and isolate the effects of that code and essentially not bring down the whole farm if there's any issues. And that's really the only effective means to achieve certain things in SharePoint, like feature receivers and event receivers. And that's been deprecated by SharePoint. It's still there, but it's deprecated. Microsoft's sort of official recommended direction is to go with the app model. But in our real-world experience, we do feel that that's got quite a few gaps and restrictions that still need to be worked out. I'm sure they will, but at the current state, those are definitely gaps that do exist. Lack of QA and testing environments. So we've talked about this before. It's hard from a developer point of view when you don't have the ability to deploy a solution to a true QA or testing environment. Debugging is much more challenging as scripts are all minified when they're actually placed on the server. And also, you can't leverage the wealth of existing scripts that are currently available for on-premise. We haven't had that chance to build up that arsenal at this point, given where 365 is at. From an operations and management point of view, so this is sort of ongoing operations and management of a SharePoint solution. What works well is it's extremely quick and easy to get a base solution up and running. It's extremely easy to access production in that you don't need to use VPN as you might have had to do with on-premise solution. And options like Active Directory Federation Services or ADFS allow you to leverage things like existing user profiles. On the key challenge front, really the most important one here is visibility on tenant upgrades. And that makes it difficult to know what specific iteration your tenant is running. You can't test the effects of updates in advance of when they're applied. And that leads into the need to constantly evaluate updates as they get released. There's less capabilities to monitor system health. You can't do things like manipulate timer jobs to force certain actions that are very useful in on-premise. And it lacks the ability to back up and restore a site, which is a pretty common technique when you're refreshing a QA from production. Hopefully those are things that can be addressed over time. So just to wrap up in summary, and we will have some time for questions, and we have some technical folks in the room for that. But just to wrap up the content that I've covered so far, and some closing points to leave you with. So SharePoint Online is best suited for these three areas: enterprise collaboration and social, external collaboration, content sharing and social, and web content management. And for this, we stress for light to medium scale employee portals. Those are the areas which we think are the sweet spot for SharePoint Online as it stands right now. The cloud alternatives can help to address the following things. So addressing internal IT readiness and capacity, removing situational barriers, and increasing speed and agility. You want to think configuration versus customization. With that said, customization to some degree can be achieved through cloud-hosted apps when you're talking about integration and custom development, and compose look and feel when you're talking about branding application. And some of the key challenges, the most important ones to us, include things like the visibility and effects of feature updates, the ability to have true QA test and training environments, the ability to back up, restore, and do remote deployments, restrictions and gaps with the app model as it currently stands, and also, as we mentioned, applying branding to certain system pages like your profile page. So that brings to an end the core content that we wanted to cover here, and leaves us with about 15 minutes to answer some questions. We've got some senior technical folks in the room who have all had extensive first-hand experience in all of our cloud-based Office 365 projects, as well as developing apps for the app marketplace. So they're a really good, knowledgeable group of folks. So I'll turn it over to Elisa, who will bring up any questions that are being posed via WebEx. And also, at this time, if you can think of any, please, we'd love to answer your questions now.
Okay, so an easy one for you here right off the top. Can you guys describe what a tenant is? Will mentioned it a few times throughout the presentation, and what does that actually apply to in the Office 365 world?
Okay, Thomas here. I can answer that. Try to answer that question. And in a multi-tenant tenancy environment, multiple customers will share the application and share the same operating system and the same running on the same hardware and using the same data storage mechanisms. And it's actually the application design that prevents one customer to see the other customer's data. It can kind of be compared with an apartment building where you get your own apartment, you're a tenant in that building, and someone takes care of the elevator and the swimming pool for you, but you still have a key for your apartment, which is your kind of private area within the building. And getting a tenant on Office 365 is kind of a similar thing. You purchase your private storage or a private space in the cloud, but Microsoft is still hosting all the infrastructure, taking care of the storage for you, and all that.
So Will addressed in the end that one of our concerns is that some of the gaps in the app model. Could you guys speak to those specifically, maybe, what some of those might be?
Sure. This is Mike here. A couple of the gaps that we've found to date, Will mentioned one of them around a fluid UX sort of experience. At the moment, if you're going to build an app part, which is pretty much analogous to a web part, We don't have the ability to allow for a fluid adjustment in the width when it's on a page, which is somewhat of a big deal, especially when you're dealing with a collaboration sites and wiki pages where you're not dealing with a stronger sort of fixed layouts in a publishing scenario. So that's one of the gaps that we've run into, and I've been talking with the Microsoft product team about that. Another one that we've run into is typically if you're building web parts in a farm-based solution, you want to pick up the context of the page and some of the information about the page where that web part actually resides and lives. A simple example that we use in a lot of our employee portals is search feedback, where on the search results page, a great way to elicit feedback from users in terms of if the results they're getting when they're looking for information, if it's coming back great or if they're not able to find what they want, we provide a mechanism for them to provide that sort of feedback. In order to be able to ascertain the information of what they're actually searching for, in an on-premise solution, we need to pull all the sort of stuff from the query string, which is where all their search criteria is stored. Unfortunately, currently in the app model, from a permission standpoint, they don't allow you to get at that type of information. Each sort of app that you deploy, it's very self-contained from a security boundary context. Again, spoken with the Microsoft product team about this. They're aware of it. It's raised. They've talked about a roadmap of providing, again, different types of security permissions to be able to add to get at that. But in general, that sort of context of having apps be able to, like web parts, be able to communicate with each other on a page as well, in that sort of general context, there are some gaps there. So we're still working at some creative solutions in terms of seeing where it can fit in, but those are definitely a few that we've run into to date.
Thanks, Mike. Will, you mentioned a site directory as a way to get around the out-of-the-box sites area for SharePoint Online, where when you have a number of team sites, it becomes overwhelming to find what you're looking for. Can you expand on what that looks like and the process in actually building out a site directory?
Sure. Yeah. So it ended up being something that could be easily configured. It really didn't require a great degree of development or any development. It was mostly a front-end development and controlling the presentation. We were able to leverage what is available in terms of search and provided a fairly simple site directory for a couple of solutions that we built. That included the ability to have a faceted list of the sites that's faceted by things like a template, the department that the site is associated with, and ultimately using search as a means to index the list of sites that we have, and generally made it easier to find and discover sites and begin to follow sites that you have.
So with that being done with mostly front-end development, is that a significantly different approach than what we would have taken for an on-premise implementation? So generally speaking, SharePoint 2013 does, as well as SharePoint Online and on-premise, they both require greater involvement from front-end developers than has ever been in the past. Mike, I don't know if you want to add to that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely from the Web 2.0 sort of aspect, more and more of a push from the SharePoint platform in general, whether you're talking about on-premise 2013 or SharePoint Online, is definitely moving more of the custom development to the client side. So heavy on JavaScript development. They've really expanded their API front to provide a pretty robust RESTful API in combination to their CSOM, their client-side object model for JavaScript as well. So with the REST API, it's quite nice for building out on all sorts of platforms, targeting for mobile devices and such as well.
Speaking of mobile devices, can you build a responsive site with SharePoint Online?
So the answer to that is yes. We've had experience building responsive themes that are applied to things like the out-of-the-box team sites and community sites. We have found that the effort to do that was not that significant. It was fairly easy to do. And the door is definitely there for companies like ourselves or clients with that skill set in-house to provide those responsive themes over top of a SharePoint site.
So I have a question around change management for new releases to the platform. So you mentioned that Microsoft is targeting every 90 days and that there can sometimes be outages associated with that. Are there any other really important things to note around that continuous update cycle as a user that I think you also mentioned having to test constantly depending on your tenant?
Yeah. Well, first off is the visibility of what's coming down the line. It's hard to tell what is a feature that's being put on the roadmap, and that's partly because Microsoft is shifting their development model to a little more bit of an agile approach brought in by the Yammer acquisition. So it's probably harder for them to predict exactly what features they're going to be adding, but certainly any degree of roadmap visibility would be useful. That's not there right now. And also the frequency in which those updates are released. As I mentioned, they're released to batches of tenants. So that can mean that one tenant might be different from another. For example, the recent changes to Yammer, we had a couple different tenants. Some of them had it, some of them didn't. So that's just part of being in the cloud and puts more onus on the portal management function to constantly stay on top of that and communicate to the users any kind of new features that are coming out. If you want to take advantage of them, how you would do that.
And maybe just to add to that, Charles here, I think the approach that Microsoft is using with the cloud really enables easy ramp up of a platform and using the features and getting the latest features every 90 days as they release them. But at the same time, it also forces the companies to adjust that model where you need to adapt the training and the usage of those features over time. So in terms of release management of the solution, be able to do a release to quality assurance to production, the cloud provides that limitation right now where you cannot really leverage that model using Office 365 directly. And from a training and release management, also changes your communication plan around the training, the support, and how you behave with that.
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to the mobile app development. When Apple releases iOS 6, and all the app developers have to update their apps to coincide with that, usually within relatively short notice. It's fairly similar to this model here.
So you mentioned that, the training and communication materials required by a company to kind of keep up with that continuous update. Does Microsoft provide anything like that companies can leverage, or are you kind of on your own to create those materials and distribute them within your organization?
Yeah, it's definitely evolving space, let's say. So I think those will come over time. Right now, there's some degree of support, but there's definitely room for improvement.
I don't have any more questions. We've got 2 minutes left. If someone wants to try to sneak one in quick, then maybe we can address it. But just some closing notes. We have been recording this webinar, and we'll make it available through our website after a few days after today, so that you can come back and re-listen to all these juicy bits. Also, WebEx will be sending out a survey to you that's sent automatically, and we have no control over. We're sorry. You don't need to fill it out at all. Just wanted to thank Will very much for a great presentation today and for the panelists for joining us. Having you guys in the room is definitely a lot less stressful when those technical questions come up. So thanks very much. I hope everyone has a great Thursday morning, afternoon, wherever you are. And please feel free to follow up with any of us in the future if you have any additional questions around SharePoint Online or what Office 365 means for you in your company.
Thanks, everyone.